ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shelby Combs.
All right. So I've been in the medical device arena for a little while now, and I'm trying to figure out how to switch between slides about, how about that? It's skipping my second slide. All right, well, that was the second slide's not a big deal. That was just about me. So basically, I've been in the medical device arena now for about 14 years. I actually spoke at, was it your conference? When was that?
NX in 2014. You were at my second event in Minneapolis.
Was that your second event?
It was.
Wow, I didn't know that. And
it's been 8 years since you've graced our stage.
So yeah, and so I've been working with medical devices. I've been working a lot with hospitals. I've been kind of in a role where I've been working with technical assistants and VCSOs doing work across many different varieties of healthcare. And through this process, I've kind of kept a beat on medical devices and security and what's been going on in that process, and medical devices and IoT together kind of have blended. And throughout the past couple of years, I've noticed something that has kind of started to very much alarm me. And we'll get to that a little later, but one of the main thing that was alarming me was that the vernacular around medical device security hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 10 years. We're hearing the same type of information. And I went to HIMSS this year down in Orlando, and they had a big section on medical devices. And I literally could have told everybody in there what was going to be said on the next slide, because they were basically presenting the same ideas and the same concepts that have been around for the last 10 years. And it's frustrating because where are we at? What are the missing pieces? And why are we not changing? Why isn't things moving along the way it should? And so what I kind of do is I'm kind of going to go after this a little bit different angle today. And I'm going to first of all show you guys what I'm seeing out in the world in the hospitals. If you're making medical devices, I think it's important for you guys to understand what is it that the environment looks like. And I've been in over 250 clinical buildings in the last 2 years. I've had my feet on the road. I've been driving around.
That's astounding, especially given COVID, where people are not allowed to go into the building. But I guess you know how to avoid their technical things, and you sleuth your way in with your cyber something or other.
When they started locking down in March of 2020, everybody in our organization decided to stay home. I threw up the flag and said, I'm just going to go ahead and keep on working the way I worked before. And I went ahead and I changed the way I maneuvered through the country and how exposed I was. But every one of those clinics had COVID clinics.
Did you get COVID more than once? Did you ever get it?
I had COVID. My family has all had COVID. My wife has had COVID, and I have never gotten it.
Wow. Yep. You're super immune.
I at this point, either I am just a person who didn't have any symptoms, or I caught it right away and I didn't know. But I was
asking, what was the name of the conference you attended in Orlando?
HIMSS.
HIMSS. Okay. HIMSS. Got it.
And
was it well attended, by the way?
It was decently attended. I went to the one in Vegas in 2021, and that was not well attended. It was like, I have pictures of the whole floor and only like a few vendors sitting there.
I know that they really disenfranchised a lot of people when in 2020 they canceled the event. Of course, they had to, and they did not refund people.
Yeah. In 2021, they tried to spread it out through all of Vegas. And so you're like, well, I'm going to go to conference A, and now I got to go to conference B. I got to walk 3 miles across 2 buildings. And so it was very different. But so the current environment. So when the first time I did this with you guys, when I looked at the charts, it was absolutely 100% different. It was completely flopped. Theft, loss, physical security of devices was the #1 way devices were being hacked. And the information was being stolen.
I want to be clear, it's not clear to me here. What time frame are you discussing on this slide?
The time frame, this would have been this is 1 year.
1 year ago.
So what I would say back in 2000, what was it, 2010? Or no, 13 or 14 when we did?
Yep.
The chart would have looked that 75 to 80% of it was theft. And only like 8 or 9% maybe would have been hacking. Now, over the last 10 years or so, or 12 years, it's completely flipped. Now, theft, stealing isn't necessarily the major issue. It's all hacking. All the devices.
And in fact, they're still stealing.
Yes.
They're stealing data. They're stealing access. And before you needed to take a machine to do it. Now you don't.
Correct. Right. They're still stealing. And plus, when you start looking at the access and the amount of records they're getting in through hacking, you might get one device when you steal something, but when you hack, you're going to get 11 million, or you're going to get 1 million or 2 million. So that's going to offset the fact that stealing a device might not.
I've just hacked the screen, and this is a picture of Shelby presenting in 2014. And you're looking great, actually, relative to this picture. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I paid for that.
So that's 8 years ago. And I don't remember what that thing you were holding was called, but I do remember you scaring the hell out of everyone with it. Yeah, and that's why I had to ban you from the conference for 3 to 5 years. Would you tell them what you were holding and why it frightened us so?
So a Wi-Fi Pineapple gives, and believe it or not, they've come out with newer versions and better ones.
I'm sure. It's 8 years ago.
The Wi-Fi Pineapple gives you the ability to set up a rogue network, and the device itself will kind of duplicate the environment. So if I walk into a Hilton and I set it down and turn it on, it will hook up to the Hilton Wi-Fi, and then it will make a sub-Hilton Wi-Fi that looks the same. And it will even create, you can even make it create the web pages and everything automatically, so that you don't know whether you're on the regular Hilton Wi-Fi or if you're on going through this Wi-Fi Pineapple. And once you go through the Wi-Fi Pineapple, then I can see everything you're doing, all the different passwords you're putting in, everything like that. And so that's why you never trust untrusted networks. Because it could be anybody. If you ever looking around and you're scanning and you see, John's network or something like that, oh, they have no password on it, let's go see if I can get internet access. Yeah, you might be able to, and it might be somebody who's legit, but it also might be somebody who's setting up a Wi-Fi Pineapple. Now, you can buy those online. They're only $100, and you can get all the training off YouTube. And
nice.
Yep.
So for $100 and an investment of a few hours of YouTube education, I can set this up, secure your password, siphon the money out of your bank account, and make like the wind. Okay.
Yep, that's definitely true. Am I still presenting?
Well, you can again, but no, your slides are not presently visible.
All right, we'll move on.
You're not the only one who can hack. I want to,
well, especially when you have control of keys to the kingdom.
True. So Robert is, and he works in the OR and with anesthesia, as I recall, Robert, and he said that's why surgical teams don't trust anything in the operating room.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so threat entry points, what we've been seeing in the last year, a lot of phishing and ransomware. Definitely tons of ransomware.
I cannot see your slides.
Oh, do I have to reshare?
Yes, please.
Okay, so phishing and ransomware, tons of ransomware out there. It's when we're doing tabletop exercises now with the healthcare clinics, it's 20 to 30% of the people raise their hand when we're in a building to say they've been ransomware. And then I go, how many of you had a fire? And you maybe one, most likely zero. But when you walk into a clinic, when you walk into places, tons of fire equipment around everywhere. But when you ask people if they're ready for ransomware, people haven't done their incident response plan, haven't gotten ready for that. So there's all these different ways that facilities are, all these different things that facilities are working with, trying to keep data safe, from the connected devices to social engineering, to making sure people aren't accessing their medical records and doing that correctly, to watching their vendors, their business associates, the internal threats, people stealing stuff. I had a clinic just 2 weeks ago that somebody was flying a drone up and peeking in the window. And so now they have to install certain curtains so that drones can't look into windows. So it's constantly moving, constantly changing. And these poor CISOs and CEOs are dealing with this on a daily basis. And it's prolific. So what does
I say this cartoon you have, it makes hacking look very complicated, but in fact, it's just some guy in a t-shirt calling you up and asking you for the password, and you just let him in.
Yep. Hey, Bob. I need your password. I'm the IT guy. What's your password? And believe it or not, that works all the time. But then, you know, Hollywood always has it, you know, screens and decrypting and everything like that. But the reality is it's very much just either somebody posting their password on their desk, somebody walking by, some, you know, and things like that. Some very simple, straight up things. And that's part of ransomware and phishing.
May I ask, your slides say online results guaranteed. I'm not familiar with this brand. I know your company was bought out. In fact, for those who were at 10X, Vidya came to us courtesy of Shelby, who was unable to attend, and MedCrypt bought what was your old company. It turns out that Mike, the CEO of MedCrypt, was a 10X speaker back in 2018, so it was nice to keep it in the family. I don't recognize this brand, so what is that?
Online Business Systems is I had my own company for a while, but for the last about 3 years now, I've been working for Online Business Systems. They kind of hired me out, and I've been working as a technical security consultant for them.
So you're a freelancer?
I work through online, so I work with, they're my company, so no different than a PwC or a Accenture or a Deloitte. We're a security firm that does security consulting with a big focus on, we do tons of PCI stuff.
I didn't realize that you stayed kind of independent from a market-facing view. I thought you were subsumed into MedCrypt, but that's not the case.
No. In fact, we have a lot of good, we're a small company, about 80 of us that are high-level security consultants. We do all kinds of different things. We just got done with, me and 2 other people were the head auditors for Walmart HIPAA compliance. We just got done doing their HIPAA compliance for Walmart. So that's why I've been a little bit busy over the last couple of weeks.
I better be quiet because you have a lot to share, and this topic is just rife with questions and concerns. I'll do my best. In fact, I'm going to put myself on mute, people.
So I always go over this because I want people to know when you're protecting data. Why are we protecting data? What does it actually look like? And a lot of people don't do this, but this is actually, this ad in the bottom is an ad that I pulled off about a couple of months ago from the dark web. And when your data is on the dark web, it's called a FULZ, F-U-L-L-Z. And what they're trying to do is take the FULZ, which is patient, just people data, you know, phone numbers, cell phones, credit card data, addresses, all that stuff. If you package it together, then, and you can form this thing called a docs. And if you can sell that docs then to make identity kits. And once they have that information, it is to steal your identity, create passports, create licenses, and stuff like that. And this is actually an ad. Somebody looking for a FULZ for $1,000 to $3,000, depending on what information is in there and who it is on. And so these are prolific. You can find them out on the dark web, and they are not sophisticated. People always tell me, hey, it takes a lot of sophistication. No, it doesn't. It takes a YouTube video and a VPN connection and the willing to break the law. And so it is not sophisticated. What else does that look like? These are dark web examples. You can go on the dark web, and if you have some Bitcoin and you just want to create havoc in the world, you can basically hire a hacker at any time. And you can set up these arrangements to you know, try to password recovery or hack somebody's email, or to try to bypass multi-factor authentication, create custom.
Explain dark web to us, because it's not like we can go to a browser and just type in darkweb.com or dark. How do you access the dark web?
So the dark web is what I would say anti-Google. When Google was created and web and browser and these browsers were created, they decided what websites needed to be shown and what websites didn't. So there are tons of websites that you can go to if you type in something like ransomware. Then there are websites that are beyond what Google will allow, or these people allow, and they're the dark web ones. So there are a list of websites that are published out on the web, but you necessarily can't get to them through a browser.
So if you know the direct URL, you can get there.
Yeah, right into them, right.
Oh, okay. So the dark web is simply that which is not indexed through a browser.
Correct.
A browser, right.
So then you can go to these places like The Onion that might have a list of these different places and stuff like that. So it sounds really bad when you say the dark web, but it
just
really
means that it's not easy to find. But
you can make a web page, don't index, you're on the dark web.
Huh. So when you're making something and you just click no index, that's dark web?
Yeah, typically you're on, then they have like what they call the deep web and the things like that. And it depends on how nefarious you want to get, how evil you want to be. When you start looking at some of these, I mean, and if you go down in here, you can hire an assassin, you can hire things like that. And so it gets really down. I just focused on the technical stuff, but there are tons of illegal stuff on these sites that a browser wouldn't allow, right?
So I have to ask, there are a number of people I want killed. Where would I go exactly?
It's the dark web, and you look for, and I have a feeling that some of them are probably owned by the FBI and the NSA.
But still, whatever it is,
yeah.
If I get online, there is some string of characters that I can type in to get there. So when you say the deep dark web, is it like, what does that mean? It's still some characters. If you give me the URL, I can get to any level of deep.
You have to go, you want a VPN, your system, and then you want to go through a Tor browser, which encrypts your communication. Otherwise, your computer will be toasted within 20, 30 minutes. You'll pick up a virus or something like that. Unprotected browser.
Right. So it's not like my cable company is just going to let me go to the assassin page.
They will, but you will probably wreck your machine doing that if you go unprotected and
okay.
Right. I did it right away, and I toasted my machine in 30 minutes. So then I decided to use a Tor browser and hide my identity and make it a little harder for people to understand.
So has enough time passed where you can tell us who you had killed?
No, not yet. Yeah. So moving on quickly. So, over the past 2 years, I said I've been in about 250 buildings. What is it that medical facilities are seeing? Again, this is the data that we collected: phishing, ransomware, unauthorized access, theft of equipment, and paper disclosure. And I'll go into a little bit. So what does that look like? I kind of want to show what this looks like out in the facilities. So I always say, when the medical device world sees the hospitals as these pristine, great environments, right? And you walk in these buildings and they're beautiful, and but they all have dirty back closets and basements and things that people are dealing with. So we're a lot of the I wouldn't say the big hospitals, but the medium-sized to lower end that is slowly moving into the medical device realm right now is dealing with a lot of issues. And one of them is, what do we do with massive piles of old paper that is constantly, every one of these could be put on the dark web and they're just sitting there. People could take a record, bam, you got $1,000 to $3,000 in your pocket if you need to sell that. Very unsophisticated. Old equipment sitting around. And these are real pictures from the last year, by the way. These aren't 20 years old pictures. This is within the last couple months. Piles of hard drives of an Apple IIe. That's still sitting there in a closet. That's what, 20 some years old? Cooling problems, wiring problems, storage problems, server problems, lack of access to rooms. And if you need to lose some weight, you always have a shaker belt still around. Things that you might not seem to be a security issue. Like these, you guys all walked into the hospital and you have these automatic doors that you walk through and they open up. Well, those are, if you slide a piece of paper under there and wave it around, a lot of them will open up without having access. So they're dealing with stuff like that, inappropriate access to areas that might have equipment, using very bad realtor locks, which you can figure the code out within minutes if you know the secret to these things. And plus, people never scramble. I've broken into 2 pharmacies and 1 hospital because they had extra keys in these and they didn't scramble the code. And then you got stuff like
that was your job to do. You were asked to see if you could break in.
Right. Yeah, I was there with people. And then you got stuff like this that in the basements of these are all funny pictures. This is my funny slide of things that I run into. The left one's actually a prohibition keg roller. So you could pull across the street and drop kegs down into the basement without anybody knowing. And that's their emergency management plan with Chuck Norris on it. And then you never should have minions in your basement. That's just a bad sign, right? All right. So medical device security, principles of security, ethical and legal. This is where I draw the line between a lot of people. And I've gone back and forth with Mayo Clinic for years now. places like Mayo Clinic come in and they are always speaking at every conference I go to. And Mayo Clinic's great. They got a multi-million-dollar team of pen testers who pen test device, find out the critical weaknesses, and apply patches and apply and implement security around them. But the problem is that's great for Mayo Clinic. And if you're developing a device and you want to develop it at that level where there's holes and security hasn't been looked at, and you send it off to Mayo Clinic, they're going to help you find those holes and they're going to do it. But the reality is the majority of the healthcare clinics in the United States don't have the budget, the time, or the resources to do that type of security on devices. So they tend to just plug them in, use them the way they are, and don't provide the security that is needed for those type of devices. So real quickly, you know, and I always go over this, I get this a lot. Most medical device companies basically are not covered by HIPAA. And are not, HIPAA doesn't apply to them. But when it comes to security, I always say this: when you look at if your device has any type of patient names, phone numbers, addresses, insurance numbers, social security numbers, any type of PII, and if you go to New York, they've expanded it now under the, I can't think of the act off the top of my head, to include things like credit card information and different types of PII, then you have to really think about, if we get breached, do we fall under the HIPAA privacy rules? Do we fall under some of the other privacy rules and security rules that apply to us now that we have information on it? Plus, if we get breached and the organization gets breached because of our device being weak, you know, now you got issues of legal issues with whether not that device caused the breach of patient information on the healthcare records, whether or not that caused their service to be down, financial issues, just a ton of stuff. So it's best just to make a secure device and not have to deal with that. If your device does have information on it, and you are a type of medical device company that's going to be billing, and you are a covered entity, then you absolutely have to go through a security risk assessment. And when I say that, a security risk assessment isn't just going through and check boxing the HIPAA rules. Oh yeah, we do this, we do this, we do this. A security risk assessment is more than that. It's what are the threats out there to your device, and how do we mitigate those threats? It isn't just about controls. It's about the threats to the devices. A lot of times we try to go through this through the controls and say, hey, you know, okay, we have access control and we have 10 character passwords and things like that. That's part of it. But there also is, you know, what's the likelihood of this happening? What's the impact of this happening? How does it impact your organization? So it's actually risk to you and your organization.
Shelby, when you started your presentation, you lamented how little has changed in the way people are talking about security in medical devices. Michelle, in fact, FDA has been pretty aggressive in updating the language about what is acceptable for a submission. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yeah, yes and no. So they're finally kind of coming into this century at the end of last year with about a half dozen or so new guidances around software and medical devices. And one of them was cybersecurity. But the previous guidance, I think, was from 2014 or 2018. And so by the time that they publish a draft of what they're thinking, it's already irrelevant. And so just because the whole process of developing public policy in the FDA is so onerous that I don't know how they're going to be able to keep up with these changes. I think that they're still trying to regulate it like the people that have the Chuck Norris emergency plan.
Nice. Please don't make him laugh. He's in pain.
Emergency plans is a nemesis to everywhere I go. No one does them until it's too late. And then if I ever find a good emergency management plan, it's because they've had an incident last year and they've had a reason to have an emergency management plan. I always say the only place I really ran into a great emergency management plan is West Yellowstone Medical Systems, because they deal with every type of imaginable emergency you can imagine, with earthquakes and volcanoes and fires and consistently. So yeah, I agree with you on that. And so when I said that there hasn't been a lot of changes, partially because we're still talking about, at this point, providing security, and that security needs to be done on medical devices and IoT. And to me, that's after basically 14 years of talking about security on medical devices, why are we still trying to convince companies that security is an issue? You know, everybody seems to and should know this at this point. And going through and sitting in conferences where they're telling people that, hey, you know, you need to provide security on devices. That to me is we should be past that point and beyond that maturity level, and be looking at, you know, what are the best ways to do that? How do we go to 2.0 or 3.0 on creating security for this? And so that leads into this slide, you know, and again, this is a slide to convince people why we need security, you know, and why am I even doing this at this point? You know, we know the repercussions of not providing security on your devices, but yet I run into devices out there that just are done in a very, the focus, I'm not going to say poor, the focus is on getting it done and getting it to market, and whether we can do what the client needs, and not on was security looked at through the whole process and what does that mean to the organization. And so as we move forward now with security in a lot of these organizations, we're getting to where people that are in the CIO positions understand security. We're running into less of the CIOs and the CEOs that don't understand security and don't understand the need for it. And so we're running into more people that do understand it. And when they look at devices, they're going to be asking that question, you know, how are these secured, and how are you guys doing that? And what is the process of doing that? And so as a designer, the strengths, you know, the SWOT for this is that you basically are reducing the likelihood and that something's going to come back to your organization. We know from the past that if there's a critical security vulnerability, they might scrap your product altogether. Was it I can't remember, it's the Hospira, what were not insulin pumps, but there was a Hospira device a few years ago that had a critical flaw in it. And that ended up costing them a lot of money to go back and try to fix that type of stuff. You know, and then also if you were making a device that doesn't address security, and then you want to do something like get up on the Verizon network with it, and then they have a security process. I helped design that a few years ago that you have to go through in order to get your device up onto the Verizon network. And if you haven't thought of that at the beginning, then you're going to have to go back in your design cycle and redo some stuff, maybe even hardware, to get that to play nicely with the Verizon network. Again, as an organization, you guys, when you develop something, want to be seen as a leader in this area and not as somebody who, oh yeah, we do security on the side. It's definitely a sales point. And I always put this in here. This is kind of what I call the candy wrapper. Again, it's me trying to convince people why they need security, but I shouldn't be doing this at this issue. And so that's what leads me into saying, I am telling organizations at this point, when I work with that, when you have a BAA with a medical device company, you need to look at what happens if this device isn't secured properly from the financial side. And it leads to a major breach of your information and your patient information. You shouldn't be the one that holds the legality of that. It needs to fall back on the designers. And it needs to be looked at from a design aspect. If there were things skipped, if there was things missed, and if they were being too cavalier with their design. And we need to kind of start writing that into the BAAs and contract agreements that, hey, if you skip stuff and this ends up being a big issue for us in our organization, it's going to fall back on you guys financially. You know,
I'm going to ask, I know what the next slide is because I did see it, unless you changed everything. The next slide is the one to scare the hell out of everyone. So everyone go just take a break.
I don't know.
Meditate, just breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth.
What slide are you talking about?
I'm talking about the IoT medical device landscape development architecture.
Oh, I did move one slide around, and then I'll do that one.
Okay, go to the one next slide that won't scare people.
I moved this one because we know the design process, right? And this basically is to show that security falls throughout the whole design process from day one to day end. And it just, keeps on going. It falls to have a list of stuff that you're doing throughout the whole process to make sure you're hitting the security. I'm
overgeneralizing, and I'm a really simple person when you come right down to it. So far, I've heard Shelby knows a lot about security. A lot of people are still in the dark ages. Hey, everybody, you need security. Hey, everybody, I'm really serious. Hey, I'm really, really serious. And okay, I should know that. Got it.
Yeah.
Now you're going to show us a slide about how complex it is, and that's going to scare us. But before you do, I know, and I've had this question before, and it comes to me time and again. So Alyssa, for example, I'm going to bring Alyssa on. She is working on a device that will be a better way to heal after you have a knee replacement.
Nice.
There is no online capability to that, right, Alyssa? There's nothing connected to the web about your device.
Correct. There is, we are developing an app for tracking of the trays, but that is further down the line.
Because anything, once you say app, I'm thinking there's someone who could get in there and mess things up. I'm thinking about somebody who sells, thimbles. There's nothing, complex about this, so I don't really have to worry about this.
Yes, at this current point, there is no app integration needed. There's no development for IT infrastructure other than with our billing. Our billing will have to have HIPAA compliant billing.
So you'll be a covered entity under the billing.
What does that mean, a covered entity?
That means anytime that you're starting to connect with patients and start taking money and dealing with that, then you're a covered entity under HIPAA, and you'll have to have a security risk assessment.
Okay, so she's not immune either.
No.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Is anyone immune? Is the thimble guy immune?
Thimble guy might be immune. If you're just making a scissors, or you're making something that is a medical device that is more of a hardware type thing, that isn't collecting data other than, like taking a blood pressure, then somebody writes the blood pressure down somewhere, we're probably then somewhat immune. But if your device, if you start then charging and collecting patient data and collecting people's names and things like that, you're going to move into the HIPAA world really quick.
I'm bringing Jorgen. In the meanwhile, he writes, can you address what the cost impact is through the development process?
Oh, that's going to really vary depending on the complexity of what you're doing, right? If it's a relatively simple thing, it isn't that bad. If it's a very complex, it's going to be a big difference. A pacemaker programming machine is going to have a lot more security involvement in it than something like a testing cup, or something like that tells if you are a drug testing cup or something like that. But yeah, so that's the upside impact for pricing does add pricing to your design process, but so does lawyers and having to retool your device and going back and changing things after you've gone past a certain point in your development process. If you're in this end part here and you wanted to do something like hook to Mocana or hook up through a gateway into Verizon or something like that, and they come back and say, hey, you don't have the right type of chip over here in your analysis to do that, it's not secure enough for our network, then you have to redesign, redevelop, and develop the whole device off from the start. That's expensive too.
No, I'm hearing you say
that is exactly why I raised my hand. It's because if you look at this, because most of this technology in medical devices is coming up out of startups and small companies, and no, don't move on yet. like that slide. No, okay. So I just want to point out where his process starts is in concept development and early device feasibility. And most of these companies aren't even thinking about design controls. They're thinking, oh, I'm just prototyping, it's no big deal. But look at how much time you've lost if you haven't thought about these things and planned them from the minute you conceived the thought idea for the device. And then what if you thought about them, but then you didn't document them, and then you're reverse engineering the whole process. It is not uncommon for me to get people that are in the gray with not one piece of documentation about their hardware or their software, much less their cybersecurity.
Right.
Shelby, what I'm hearing you say is, there's so many people not thinking about this, and it's kind of an extra expense that they hadn't, but developing is an expense, quality is an expense, regulatory is an expense. We don't question these. Cybersecurity is in there too. And why haven't people understood that from the start? I think is what you're asking. Paul asked, when's the right time to start? Let me take a guess at this, at concept.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is I spoke with a security expert last night. I was at an event, and it's such a big issue. I mean, we're not just talking devices, we're not just talking hacking, we're talking all kinds of, the people who actually own these devices, the people who manage the databases that might be behind the devices. There could be bad actors, there can be employees that compromise security. And this is a very expensive process to try to control, because so for a corporation, and I'm not just talking about device design, but you design, use, all the data, where it goes, is super complex. And I think it's so complex that it hasn't really been completely defined from end to end. How does the hospital deal with it? How does the hospital use, if their security is not there, then what does it matter if the device has the security, that kind of thing. So yes, there's lots of risks and lots of things, but this is still a huge thing and not completely defined in terms of how to deal with it on a corporate level.
Well, what I'm seeing is that I think the medical device companies are leaving themselves out of a giant market. Mm-hmm. And you have the smaller hospitals now, the PCAs, the community cares. They were not sophisticated, but they are developing sophistication, and they are starting to move into the world of wanting some of these medical devices for their patients. But technologically, they struggle because they have so much on their plate. And if they have an insecure device, it will probably lead to a breach in their system, because there are all independent little factories of their own, and to implement a device into their organization that's not secure, to me, you're better off not having it then. So I'm going to move on.
You raised your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, although I think that there are so many vulnerabilities in any organization, whether it's a small company or a large company, yep, that it's hard for them to prioritize what's the most important part and because to cover it all is just prohibitively expensive at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, I'm just trying to get to everyone. D'Souza.
Oh, sorry. I don't know who you were talking to. Yeah, no, so a couple of different ones, a comment. So Joe, I think this is more proof that you need to write your book. So you want to build a medical device, right? I mean, you want to design, I mean, there's so many things that have to go into it. But this conversation is really interesting because, we're talking about, hey, thinking about security as you design, but the protocols, right? And security is an ongoing issue, right? And there's a huge degree of maturity the device companies got to develop on an ongoing basis to manage the cluster, right? The cluster of devices that are out there. Every time you do a firmware upgrade, every time, things are happening to the cluster, you want somebody's touching the database, you want to be able to constantly ping, not, just the entire database, the entire universe of network of devices that you've put out there. I'm just surprised that this hasn't become a requirement by the FDA, people like that, whichever the right authorities are, to make sure that you're keeping people safe. Because ultimately, you're keeping people safe with this. There's this conversation about you can drive and there's videos, I've not seen them. You can take a Jeep, there's somebody driving a Jeep and they demonstrate across the country and how remotely you can take over the Jeep, if you would. And that's with any IoT device that's connected to the network. I'm just surprised, and maybe as a group here, like I'm definitely going to make this an issue and make recommendations when I meet a lot of device companies being in the supply chain space. Early on, yesterday I met a new company out of Mumbai that has a robot to help children with disability. And I'll be asking them, hey, what he does, because it adds value, right? It helps me build a better relationship of trust. and then send them to other folks in our group over here to help with the security and things like that. So
I'm going to try to move things along and ask Alyssa thank you, Paul, what your comment is.
So from one thing that hasn't been discussed, and I'm looking in here and I don't see it. So from the sales standpoint, I've sold capital equipment, and part of it was the IT infrastructure. And what a lot of developers don't recognize is the cost amount to the hospital and the timeline. It can take 2 years to sell just the IT component to the hospital and get it approved. On top of that, there is a fee. For my product, it was, I think, $35,000 to that the manufacturer had to cover. So literally the manufacturer had to pay to the hospital. Now, some hospitals have it set up that way. Some hospitals don't, to where the hospital will pay the manufacturer for that initial infrastructure build out. But that's something that absolutely 100% needs to be budgeted. Just because you have an idea that's great doesn't mean it's going to translate to the consumer from a fiscal standpoint.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, since the medical device in the medical world has kind of gotten this naughty child label, right? And so what we're seeing now, and I have one of my partners is involved in this. What they're doing is they're cornering the naughty child. They're putting them in a corner, and they're designing 5G networks, and they're implementing 5G networks into a facility, and then they're pushing all the medical devices to the 5G network through gateways. However they're doing it, they're pushing them all there, and then they basically create a firewall, a wall between the medical devices and their network that they have on their facility, so that they don't have to worry about if those get hacked, attacked, or taken down.
Andre?
Yeah, my comment, we're actually on 2 projects right now. Both of them are cloud connected. One is a respiratory therapy device, and the other one is a retinal imaging device for cloud connection. And to go on what Michelle said, right in our design input template that we provide to our clients, we actually have a section there which includes cybersecurity. So, we address it right up front in the design inputs. And then, of course, our design history file is fully compliant. So, Michelle's right on target that I think it's got to be right in the initial launch of a project when you start it off. And I guess Shelby would agree with that.
Yeah. And so that kind of piggybacks right into this slide right here. I know this looks scary, but so this actually is an architecture design based off of how you build actually warships. And so this can handle extreme complexity. It also can handle something that isn't extreme complexity. And so what you're looking at here is across the top is the what, why, how, who, where, and when. And down the bottom, it's the different views of the organization. So it's the business view, the architecture view, the designer view, the builder's view, the tradesman view, the service view. We are really good at looking at this stuff from here, the physical and the component architecture. Where it starts falling off in most organizations is up here in the top. Do you have the process mapping, the business strategies, the framework mapping, the SDLC process down, the compliance review, do you know where the stuff is at? Do you have the inventory? So all of this stuff here, the administrative stuff, which requires you to do security in a really in a real mature way, tends to always fall off in the design process as not important. And this is what I always call is probably, and I went to an engineering college, and I worked with engineers for many years, and is the culture of engineering and software development, as seeing this stuff as either easy or not important. And I don't know how many times I was told by engineers or even high-level engineers, oh, that's management stuff, that's easy stuff. We got to do all this the technical hard stuff. But the technical hard stuff gets done, and this stuff is left wide open. And when there's a breach, it tends to always be that you left a door open somewhere at the top here and not at the bottom. So that's this page in general. I actually took this to a conference there's an architecture conference in Ireland that I go to. And we sat down with about 50 people, and we drafted this there during that conference, and we walked through each one of these. this is more of a template. Obviously, it changes a little bit on each product, but yeah, it's one way to look at it and to try to cover all your ends. Another way to look at it when you did designing is what I call kind of the domain model way, and using a framework like NIST, using the different domains of NIST and seeing whether or not you can use 853 or you can use like ISO 80001, one of those different types of frameworks, and then just walking through the component to the different domains and using the development process to say, okay, where do these domains fall? When do we need to address these domains, and what type of controls and processes fall into each one of these domains? So that's two different methods that I've seen used. And this is more of that same type of domain. What type of security falls in each domain?
Rick has a question, but I know this topic is terribly relevant for him. I think of him as my design for manufacturing guy. Rick, what's your perspective on what you've heard, and how do you presently integrate this into your thinking when you take on a new client?
Well, I couldn't resist coming in. I couldn't resist listening to this presentation because it's so important. The design that I do is mechanical design, and so naturally you would think that, well, it's mechanical design, it has nothing to do with cybersecurity. And the question that flew off the top of my head was, how effective is a VPN in terms of this? In terms of keeping your data safe, especially if I'm doing a little work in a coffee house or something like that, or accessing a 3D model on my phone or one of those things. But what it really comes from is that I'm handling not only IP, but operational security on devices that nobody has an idea exist yet. And so my takeaway from this is, I'd love the answer to the VPN question, but my takeaway from the whole thing, Shelby, is that it's, for me, it's just as important as if I was writing software for these guys.
Yeah, so the VPN, the VPN is one of the main ways you secure connection, right? And so that's your access control and your interface. So that's like your human interface right here. You have the AP, you can have APIs, VPN, and VPN does help with security. It is a big security mechanism, and you can put MFA on your VPN so that you have multi-factor authentication. Is, I would say, probably one of the top 3 or 4 things that improves security for any type of device access. I mean, because that's really what they're after, right? Access into the system. So if access is locked down, then you've eliminated a lot of areas where an outside person can get in right off. Then they have to start looking at other ways of finding access, either through phishing or trying to steal the access or trying to come in between with man in the middle. But all those are very, very sophisticated, like my cartoon. Most of the time, people just steal passwords. And that can be controlled through VPN and MFA.
What is, you were saying, was that NFA is in November?
Multi-factor authentication, like software tokens and stuff on your phone where you log in and then it sends you, hey, use this number to log in, things like that.
Yeah. Where they're sending that key code only to my device.
In fact, most insurance companies for cyber insurance will no longer, you have to have MFA on your EMR systems implemented for them to cover something like a ransomware attack to the organization. And
in essence, you must have mobile service now.
So
online is not a sufficient way to conduct business.
Right. So we're seeing, the funny thing is, and this is the way it all works, right, in our world, we're seeing people adopt better maturity and security, not because they want to keep things secure for their patients, because the insurance companies tell them they have to, that they'd be covered.
And not only that, as a service provider to, some company developing something, you always want to be flying above whatever the current standard of, at or above whatever the current standard of protection is, just because there are things that I sign saying that I'm taking all the appropriate steps to make sure that their information remains secure. Right. If I'm just flying around without a VPN and I'm just, throwing things out and having anything open or available or mixing up my data or anything, then I'm really essentially not honoring the spirit or the letter of that agreement.
Yeah. And I would say we're at the top of the mountain right now. This has been going on for a long time now. People have been signing BAAs and contracts for years. And there hasn't been a major incident that caused everybody to second guess that. But we're so integrated now, it's a matter of time. We've had one just in the last couple of years where somebody died because there was a ransomware and things went down, and somebody didn't get the service they needed. And so I think we're at the top of the mountain here when one of these things are going to come in through a medical device. And then the question is going to be, hey, did you guys do your security correctly on your medical device? And if you didn't, then you guys hold the financial responsibility for the fact that our emergency, our ER went down and we couldn't see patients for 2 days, and that cost us $500,000, and somebody coded because of that, and so that's a couple $1 million or 3 or 4. So it's I can see the thought process there.
Thank you for the contribution, Rick.
Thanks for answering that question. The only disadvantage of being brought in as a temporary panelist is I had to reconstruct what Michelle was saying. She's one of my 2 regulatory people that I recommend universally for anybody who has questions when they're starting up their product. But I appreciate the answer to that. That's pretty much along the lines of the threat level that I was seeing.
Thank you, Rick. Shelby, I think I'm not alone when I say, I see a presentation like this and I leave overwhelmed and almost paralyzed, like I don't know what to do, because it sounds as though if I even begin to look down this hole, it's going to take a lot of time and expense, and I'd really rather not look there. And I think it's tempting for a lot of people to say, well, there's plenty of targets out there. Who's going to bother with me? Like, I'm probably going to be okay. It's like insurance. Like, I live in Seattle, and statistically speaking, we are due for a major earthquake. I don't have earthquake insurance though, because I know we should, but chances are I'll be able to get away without paying a $3,000 premium this year. And it's worked out for me for the last 18 years. So that's, $60,000 I saved, right? How do you break through? If I were marketing your company, I would say, I'd love for you to have like 5 questions for us to answer. Kind of yes, no, do you this, or this, then we should talk. Because I think a lot of people are going to be like you say, they haven't gotten the message yet. And it's big and scary.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of lead off by saying, that the vernacular isn't changing. We're still talking about we need to do this. And if you don't have a software development lifecycle and some of those entry-level things on the plate, the designs and patterns, and how are you going to implement security from day one, then you need to go down that process and really look at whether or not you need security. You also need to evaluate what type of data your device is going to hold. Is it going to hold data? If it's not going to hold data, well, then it looks completely different. Are you going to bill? Are you a company that's going to want to take money and charge for your services? Well, then it looks different. If you're designing a scissors, it's going to be different than if you're designing a pacemaker. If you're designing a pacemaker, it's different than a urinary tract device. So you need to have that initial conversations about what type of security are we going to need in our organization through this process.
Perhaps you can leave us with, yes, this is overwhelming. We've shared a lot of information. We have the slides available. Can you give us a, at least do this kind of thing? Clearly, we should all call you and get an assessment about it. But at a minimum, what is a small thing we can and should do, say, in the next week to at least make sure we're not at risk for just disaster?
Again, you need a software development lifecycle that implements security from day one. And understand, if you don't have any security in that cycle, then where are you going to address it? 2, know what type of data you're collecting and where is it being stored. Is it being stored on a device? Is it a cloud connection being stored up in Amazon Cloud, something like that? Know where that data is at and what is it, because that will change what compliance frameworks that you need to adhere to. And then third, you put me on the spot here for the list. You know, just know that it isn't necessarily going to be an extremely expensive thing to call in a consultant and give you an advice about what type of security you're going to need. You know, a consultant, like almost everybody on our team could look at what you have and give you an evaluation and say, hey, you know, you're holding data here, you're holding a lot of it. And because of that, you really need to look at access controls and how you're storing it, how you're encrypting it, where are those keys being put when you are encrypting it.
How about let's close with this, where I put you on the spot yet again and say, would you be willing to spend a free half hour with any MDG premium member to talk about their situation?
Yeah.
There we go, folks. Value right there. Next week, we're going to talk to Vitaly about his autism treatment that he's going to be working on. And the following week, Dr. Lynn is going to talk to us about wound care. So 2 weeks back to back. I love these when we're talking about people, what they're doing, their companies, and all of us functional experts can say, did you think of this? Did you think of that? I think that's where there's a lot of value in this network. Shelby Cobes, you know, you're welcome to come back. I think the ban on you has been lifted. You really scared the 2014 audience. I mean, I remember like having to take him off the stage. I think physically we had to have security guards come in for you.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. I regret it.
I have all the plans in the world to be to the next one, and maybe I can even do kind of that same presentation.
Not that one, thanks. Things have changed a lot in 9 years.
No, not that one, this one. Something along this line.
You'll have new devices to frighten us. Okay, well, the most likely dates are April 25th through the 27th, so you can put that on your calendar. And for Joe Hage and Joe Hage Enterprises, this is Joe Hage saying, have a great week and a great 4th of July if you celebrate it. Bye for now.